Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 84 of the Former Action Guys podcast, and I'm your host, Justin Kramer. And this week, my buddy on Christopher Herr, who we served together at 10th Marines. He's a fire support man. He served with 3-6 during the Battle of Marjah, the push into Marjah. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. Really great episode. He, describes like the helo in, the assault, and some of the stuff that they did there. Really excellent episode. Unfortunately, this is an audio version only, and part of it is lost. I'm not sure what happened. It was like two of my systems or something crashed, and I lost a lot of information. But thankfully, we got all of his Afghanistan time and everything like that. And that's basically where it cuts off, is at the end when he's back from Afghanistan. So all that stuff's covered. We'll just have to do another one with him in the future and talk about the other stuff that he did afterwards and what he's up to now. He is the owner of a music studio in Michigan, and he didn't, obviously, because we're cut off. I didn't realize we were cut off. He didn't have the opportunity to promote his own business, so I'm going to do it here for him. Check him out on Instagram. It's at North Tower Studio. That's North Tower Studio. And at BDB Band. And one more, at Official Amber Band. So he's in multiple bands, and he owns a music studio, and he also does some contracting where he trains law enforcement and military. So really interesting. Check him out. Support his page. He told me he's on Facebook as well, so you can look up North Tower Studio on Facebook as well and see him there. And yeah, so really good stuff. Got another review in, so I really appreciate that. If you're out there, make sure to hit me a review on Apple Podcasts. We're the only one that allows it. This one's from Dominguez132. He said, I came here because of ski. Talking about Golombeski, who was on episode 82, and he's the author of Level Zero Hero. So the author of Level Zero Heroes posted on his Instagram that he was going to do a podcast. Since that podcast has come out, I have listened to eight days of different stories. I was in the Army as an infantryman and can definitely identify with a lot of the stories that have been put out by a lot of the guests on this podcast. It is more of a realistic take on what our servicemen and women have been through and continue to go through. I definitely recommend to give a listen if you're interested in or have been in the military. Hey man, really, really appreciate the review and the binge listening of the podcast. That's great. I do the same thing with podcasts that I enjoy. If I find one that I enjoy, I sit there and listen to a bunch of them. So I appreciate you checking it out. I'm glad the word got out through Golombeski or Ski's Instagram page. Hey, just like that, like I said, I've been saying the last couple of weeks, everyone just, if you're enjoying the podcast, all I ask is you tell one person, or maybe post it up on your social media that you're enjoying it or something like that, just to let people know, spread the word, help me out here. So yeah, without further ado, well, actually, make sure to check out my Instagram at Former Action Guys. So check that out and enjoy the show. For the election cycle, which is probably really smart. Like I've already been on Facebook this morning, like, what are you talking about? Like people like, oh, what the fuck, your video moved. People talking about there's a lot of misinformation out there, and it's unfortunate, and it's like, I really wish, as a journalism student, I see a lot of it now, and I'm aware of like what's occurring on some stuff, and it's tough for me to see and stomach and see the amount of people that are so like misguided because they just, they're set on their way of how things happen and stuff like that. But I felt like we should at least mention the election, since it is, I guess, ongoing, while they count
course.
While they count this.
Do you remember back when I was in, I was with politics like people were with sports. I could tell you like every representative and every senator and all the bills they proposed and how they voted down to the names and everything.
Yeah.
When I got out of the Marine Corps, I realized that I spent years dealing with that, thinking that I was like doing a service to America and my peers and friends. And I just realized that a lot of them didn't want me to do that, or didn't care, or weren't interested. And I was just wasting just huge amounts of time. So when I got out, I got away from all politics altogether.
Really?
And I only like right around the elections, just get a little bit and talk to some people and get back in it just a bit and then shut that back off again. I tend to think it's more important to tend to the part of the garden that you can reach, which is like your neighborhood, your friends, your family, your church, your city, things like that, and deal about caring about things there and making changes there rather than complain about what's happening. And, I'm in Michigan, you're in San Diego. I can't be like, oh, I can't believe they're doing that in San Diego. What's going on? But there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm kind of going through that now, where I am. I'll get into political discussions online and comments on Twitter, on Facebook, like all of it, just because I think it's, like I said before, it's hard for me to see the amount of misinformation and out of context information that floats around unchecked. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Yes.
and as someone that's a journalism student, and someone that follows politics like you described, the same way, it's just, man, it's tough to see people making decisions based off incorrect information and stuff like that, rather than taking a moment to step back and kind of look into stuff and figure it out what it is. And I mean, I guess that's part of the reason what made me decide to pick journalism, because I think we've seen, if anything else, look at the polls that all the mainstream media outlets put out prior to the election and look at how close the results actually are. Like, if you looked at the initial polls, you would have thought that Biden had this, this huge blue wave that everyone had been talking about is occurring, and that, Trump has no chance. And here we are, day 2, waiting on votes to come in because it's so close. And some of these polls had Biden winning by like 12 points and shit like that. It's just,
Yep.
And it's like, how can you still pretend to be an unbiased, truthful or accurate outlet of information when you're coming out with information like that is completely just way off the charts and completely wrong, and I don't know, man. I spend too much time on it. I'm like you, where I have moments where I'm like, what am I doing? Like, is this worth it? But I feel like someone's got to say it, man. Someone's got to put the truth out there and shit like that. And I don't get into a lot of politics on the podcast just because I don't, people come here for the stories of us and, in the military and these, the guys that are police officers and stuff like that. They don't want to hear politics and stuff. Again, I'm only bringing this up because the election, began last night. It's still ongoing at the time of this recording. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's just, it's a weird world we're living in, and I'm not too happy with the other people that claim to be journalists that are out there and some of the reporting that's being done and stuff like that. So anyway, let's move on from that, man. So like I said, it's been a long time, dude. I think, fuck, man, when's the last time we even spoke together? Was it, in person was probably before my deployment to Afghanistan, right? In 2011?
I saw you guys after that. I saw you guys come back. So when did you guys leave? You guys left, it was like May of 11 or something.
Yeah, then we got back, and I got back on actually New Year's Day of 2012. So
yeah, I saw you like in early 2012 when you guys made it back from 6th Marines back over to 10th Marines. I went and visited you all, and I think that was probably the last time.
So it's interesting because I did that deployment with 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines to Marjah. And all I fucking heard about on that deployment was 3-6 Marjah Marines. This isn't like the first Marjah. And it was like anyone that was with 3-6 during the push into Marjah were like, you guys weren't there. This doesn't count. And I'm like, all right, dude, calm down. And I thought it was, I just thought it was funny how people acted like that and stuff like that. But I wanted to have you come on the show because I know you've had an interesting career. I know you had a good time as an 0861. I think you were probably one of the best scouts that I had when I was at 10th Marines. For those that are listening, you and I worked together when we were at 210. I was like the A chief or whatever under Gunny Klein at the time. And I actually hadn't met you guys. You guys had all punched out on deployment before I got there. And then when you guys all got back, I was there. And yeah, and that's how we kind of met. And it was cool because it was seeing you guys come back from this, the push into Marjah and stuff like that, and bringing this real world experience back to the shop. And for me, it was very beneficial because I was a lap mover, had not deployed yet as an 0861. And, it was good hearing like, hey, what's really being done over there? How are processes really going, playing out and stuff like that. And it was also good, especially good for the scouts. I deployed as the fires chief, so, I was working in the COC a lot of the time. But it was really good for the scouts to come back and hear the guys like you that were out on patrols, out doing missions and stuff like that, to hear what was really happening on the ground and how your skills were being utilized. So I want to talk about all that. I want to talk about all of that stuff. But first, I want the audience to get a good background of who you are and why you joined the Marine Corps. So if you want to tell us about why did you choose to join the military, and why did you choose the Marine Corps specifically?
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. One, my name is Christopher Herr, and I was born and raised in Michigan, and I joined out of Michigan when I was 24 years old, which is kind of late for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, I played, you remember, in a heavy metal Christian band, which you always called life metal.
I called it the life metal.
And I played in that band, and we toured from about 2002 to 2008, almost like extensively, full-time year-round.
Mm-hmm.
And then I joined the Marine Corps in 2008 when I saw, I didn't feel like it wasn't going to go anywhere, but I wasn't where I wanted to be in the band, in life, things in general. And prior to being in the band, I grew up loving the military. My dad was never a part of my life, and my mom was always busy, so I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, and they were like, well, we'll just put them in front of the TV.
Mm-hmm.
So I legit feel like I was raised by 1980s action heroes. And back then, they all were always like, I'll do the right thing no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Even though everyone else is not doing it, I'll do the right thing. I'll stand for what's right. And back then, a lot of them didn't swear and didn't smoke and do stuff like that. And I was like, I want to be like those guys. So that's what got me loving the military. I saw Navy SEALs when I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
I watched Aliens back then. I watched, Saving Private Ryan in the movie theater as soon as it came out.
Yep.
And Black Hawk Down, all of that stuff. And I was like, I'm totally going to do that. I'm going to be one of those guys. Mm-hmm. And then I became a late teenager and started playing guitar and made a band and started gaining some popularity, and then got big enough that we got signed to a record label and started touring. And then my whole focus was I'm going to be a famous rock and roll star. And I took that pretty far, and I didn't get as far as I wanted, but I had gotten married. I bought a house. We were going to have a kid. And I was like, I feel like that's kind of like a teenage thing to do. I need to grow up. So then I talked with my wife, and she said, you've always loved the military. If you want to do something like that, feel free to do that. And I thought, you know what? All right. Because I always thought she was 100% against it.
Yeah.
And she said, no, I'd be totally for it. I want to get out of Michigan. I want to go see some of the world, other states and things like that. So then we joined up and shipped out, and that's how I got into the Marine Corps.
Yeah. No, that's cool. Now when you decided to come in, well, first off, touring with a Christian metal band, I think a lot of people think about rock stars and stuff going on tour and the debauchery and the fun and craziness of things that happen on tour and the stuff that they get into. What's that like for a Christian band, that's going on tour?
It's funny because if you're in the Christian community, you're just it's everyday life. We listen to the best, most crushing heavy metal music there is. People live for Jesus. They live for others. They care about the community, the people themselves. They like playing music, and they like to have fun in the way teenagers do, going to restaurants, sharing stories, and spending time with other people like that.
Mm-hmm.
We just didn't drink at all or get drunk or do anything like that, like all the other metal bands do.
Yeah.
Or not metal bands, but all secular bands that are into the whole party life and party scene and things like that. And then you talk to somebody who's not familiar with Christian metal music or anything like that, or metal music in general, and they think that's polar opposites. How Christian metal, that's a joke, right? But if you look, the Christian metal community is pretty big. There's a lot of bands that are really good. And so it's if you're not into rap music and you don't know the community and the culture and you see some of it, you're shocked by it.
Yeah.
And then the same thing, there's Christian rap music and there's secular rap music and everything in between.
Yeah.
When you
That's
all of these communities, they're just people. It's just communities of people, and in every community of people, you'll find good, bad, the ugly, and everything in between.
Yeah, that's true. Now, when you decided to pull the trigger and come in, what made you pick the Marine Corps specifically? And when you came in, did you come in as a fire support man initially, or were you open contract or something like that?
Yes. So I talked to a friend who was in, a friend's brother who was in, and I said, what's all the best jobs, that's in the fighting and this and that? And he talked about the infantry. He talked about being a scout observer, and he talked about being a tank, a tank crewman or a tank scout and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And how my wife was like, I don't want you to be in the infantry, because I wanted to join and be a scout sniper. I'd always wanted to do that since I was 5 years old, from watching Tom Berenger and Sniper and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And my wife's like, please just don't do something like that. And I asked my friend's brother, I said, well, what's like combat, but doesn't sound like it is? He's like, oh, you could be a forward observer. You could say, oh, yeah, I shoot cannons from real far away, and it's combat, but it's safe. So I told my wife, like, oh, I'm going to be, and I told the guy, his name was Sergeant France at the time, my recruiter, I said, I want to be a scout observer or forward observer. What's that called? He's like, oh, yeah, fire support man. I was like, I want to be that. He's like, well, there's also these. I'm like, no, I want to be that, or I'm walking out. I'm 24. I'm here to play games. Like, yeah. I'm going to be this, or I'm going to leave. Mm-hmm. And he's like, yeah, okay. Yeah, we can do that. And I told my wife, I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm going to be arty, far away, real safe, but still like a combat MOS. And she's like, all right, I'll allow it. And then I came in kind of under –
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of under the guise that it would be safe, but still a combat field MOS.
Yeah. So as an older guy coming in, I was the same way. I joined when I was 22. So you're coming into the military with some life experience, a little, you at this point you were already married and stuff like that. How did you deal with like coming in as like a private and having dudes that are like younger than you telling you what to do and like, dealing with that kind of thing? I think I think I have listeners that are a little bit older that are considering to join. So I think that'd be some interesting information for them.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of funny. I mean, I play as many of the games as the younger people had. Mm-hmm. I also just keep my mouth shut. I'll hammer out any work there is to be done. And they'll be like, this guy's completely reliable. And I was like, they'll just get off my back faster if that's the case. Sure. And then I had 2 NCOs one time, which I still talk to them on occasion. And they're still great, friendly guys. But I joined and I was a near diabetic. I had hypoglycemia, so I could only have sugar-free stuff, right? And I was a roommate with Ori Howe, if you remember Ori Howe.
I still talk to him.
And I talked to him too. And we shared a room, and I had a bunch of – I liked glass bottle pops. I've always liked that. I had a bunch of diet glass bottle pops in my fridge. And a bunch of my NCOs came in when I was gone, and they were drunk, and they drank them all. And I came in, and they were gone. And then I was like, who drank those? And they came in, and Ori's like, oh, these 2 drank them. And I was like, you drank my stuff? And they're like, watch it, Private. I'm a corporal. And I put them both on blast so hard. I said, look, man, you freaking take something that you don't even enjoy, and then you drink it. That's even worse. If you'd taken it and would have loved it, that would have been great. But then you come in and tell me it was terrible. I was like, I don't care what rank you are. I'm older than you. You don't come in and steal something from somebody else just because you think you have this right to. Mm-hmm. And they were like, oh, all right. And then they never bothered me again after that.
Yeah.
Then I did it.
Oh, go ahead.
And then I had one other incident where I just had an NCO who didn't like me. And I think it was, I don't know what the deal was. But he gave me the lowest pros and cons you could get. And he was a Lance Corporal. He'd been in 6 years and was about to get out. And just said, like, your uniform's disheveled. You're not a team player. You think you're better than everyone else. You have a poor attitude, a poor work ethic, all this stuff. And I was like, I think you're thinking of someone else. He's like, no, I'm not. And then the gunny who was in charge of it at the time was like, just sign it and get out of there. So I signed it and left. And then right after that is when Staff Sergeant Hahn came. At the time, Staff Sergeant Hahn.
Yeah.
And then he's like, all right, here's your pros and cons. I guess that's what you are. And then from then on, I was like, no, absolutely not. And then I had maxed out pros and cons all the way until I became an NCO under Staff Sergeant Hahn after that.
Yeah.
But I think in regards to being older coming in, those are the only incidents I ever had. And other than that, I think everyone knows that you're older. And if you have a good work ethic, and no one likes complainers, you're going to run your mouth the whole time. It's going to really bring out, if you can just remain quiet and just do as you're told, I think really quickly they'll get over a lot of the new guy, type feelings they have towards you real quick.
Yeah, for sure. For me, the biggest issues for me is that, when I first showed up, PFC Kramer got to the fleet. My platoon sergeant was 21. I think I was 23 when I got to the fleet. And he was like, hey, are you living on base? Or, he found out, he knew I got married on boot leave. I'm one of those guys. And he's like, are you going to live out in town or on base? And I was like, I'm going to live on base. I plan on living on base. He's like, okay, make sure one of your NCOs goes with you when you go to buy furniture and stuff. And I'm like, I told him, I was like, with all due respect, Sergeant, I was like, I'm older than you and all my NCOs, and I've lived on my own for like the last 4 years. I don't need one of you guys to come with me to go buy a washer and dryer. And they didn't really like that. They didn't really like that, someone is coming at them with some common sense. And I get it, man. I'm a private or I'm a PFC. Like, what do I know? It was stuff like that, and like what you're saying, like, hey, man, that's my shit. Just because you're a corporal doesn't mean you can just take my shit, And we're old enough to understand that, whereas an 18-year-old would probably just let it happen and just stew on it rather than say something. And I think that's the biggest difference I've seen with older guys coming in, is a lot of times they have common sense, and unfortunately they want to, bring that up and say something about stuff, and sometimes people in leadership positions don't approve of that. That was the whole point. That was the whole reason I even got put on the EFSS project, the Expeditionary Fire Support System, the 120 millimeter mortar and stuff, to work on that, was because they didn't like me. Because when I showed up, I was like, hey, I don't need my NCOs to come buy shit for me. I'm an adult. And they didn't really like that, so they just sent me away to go do that, which was like the best thing that could have happened. So after you so you went to MOS school, Fort Sill. How was Fort Sill for you, again, as an older person?
All of the instructors were really cool. It was pretty laid back. We did a huge pull-up competition, and all the people with the most pull-ups would have gotten something at the end, and they would tally you every single day, and me and 3 or 4 other guys hit it super hard, and just because they were like, yeah, these guys are staying in, and a lot of other people dropped off, they were like, these guys get a pass with us because they're trying harder than everyone else out of the gate. That was all cool.
Yeah.
I do have a really funny story about Fort Sill and something that happened there. And do you remember or ever heard about the Royal Rumble of 2008 at Fort Sill?
No, I can't say that I have.
Okay, so we're all there, and we have this guy, which, funny enough, he failed out of being a scout, went to try to do something else, didn't make it, failed out of that, went to something else. And then when I left, I hadn't seen him for a while. And when I came back to 10th Marines years later, after going to other units and coming back, he was at 10th Marines, and he made it somewhere, but he was just like an office, like a Bob.
A Bob. I haven't heard Bob in forever.
Yeah, and I just couldn't believe it. But this character, you remember how they would pick you up on like the cattle car buses and stuff and take you to different places?
Yeah.
On Fort Sill.
That's the only place I've ever seen that.
We got picked up and we were going someplace, and he said some sexually inappropriate thing to the bus driver. She went and sent up a complaint to the base general, and right away all these high up Army personnel showed up, was doing a full investigation. All that stuff was going on. They said all the class cadre was like, tell us who did it. And we went into a closet and we told them all who did it. And then the one person who did it said, I don't know who did it. And they said, well, we want the one person to admit it. And he refused to admit it. So the entire class of scouts got put on restriction.
Really?
For the whole duration of us being there, we were on restriction. We go to the field. He then causes some problems with a handful of guys who throw him down a mountain. We call him the hill tumbler. He falls and he busts his head. He gets dropped from our class, goes to waiting training. As soon as he gets back to waiting training, he gets his freedom back. And we're all still on restriction. And then everyone's like, you need to turn yourself in. He's like, no way, dude, I'm out in town and this and that and blah, blah, blah. He's like, I'm not going to give this up.
Yeah.
So he left the entire class of us, the other 29 of us, on restriction while he was back to freedom again.
That's crazy.
And then during all of this time we're all on restriction, there was, I don't know who it was, just some Marine that worked there that was assigned as a cadre member at Fort Sill in one of the classes, was doing duty one night. He was going through a divorce or something like that. Let everyone start partying on a Saturday. Told people to bring girls and booze back to our area, our battery area. And people were just getting out of control, and people were throwing glass bottles at people's cars and all this stuff. And the MPs got called once. They left. Got called again. They left again. He formed a huge formation. And he's talking to everyone, and he's mad. He starts taking off his chucks, and he's like, I like your daddy to all you, did I take care of all you, blah, blah, blah. He's like, who called the cops on me? Was it you? And just starts punching a kid.
Oh, geez.
And as soon as he punches this kid, everyone just starts royal rumbling. Everyone's fighting everyone else. I remember this tall kid that was going to be an FDC guy screams, blood choke him right now! And he's dragging some kid off. All these people are fighting. And you remember Hoyle? Hoyle and I both got put on. They asked, hey, who here doesn't drink? And we're like, we don't. And they're like, you guys are going to be road guards all day long, and you're going to be roving around and keep an eye on everyone. So we're both on this type of road guard type duty where we're just roving around.
Yeah.
While this huge Royal Rumble breaks out, we're trying to break everyone up and get everyone back in their rooms and stuff. All the command comes in. All the stuff happens. A couple days goes by that Marine that was working there got NJP'd, explained, that he was going through a divorce and lost his kid, lost his wife. All this stuff was happening to him. Alcoholism had taken over. Alcohol affected him that day.
Mm-hmm.
And, just all of my peers that I talked to about that time, we always just talk about the Royal Rumble of 2008 back at Fort Sill. And that was like one of the high points, non-curriculum based, of our Fort Sill experience.
Those moments are like the best moments. And those, like you said, you and your friends from there still talk about it. That's the kind of stuff that really bonds guys. Those crazy, like, little adventures you get yourself into, or like little weird things that would never happen in the real world that just kind of, happens. And,
mutually shared trauma builds deep bonds with one another.
For sure, man. For sure. I'm going to pause real quick. For some reason, your video froze. Anyway, back to your career, man. We got, I had some issues here, so we stopped there. Let's talk about getting to the fleet and kind of what you expected when you got to the fleet compared to the reality of that, and then kind of go into some of the training, the more advanced training you got, that to build on what you learned in MOS school.
Sure. So before I joined, I thought like all Marines were super elite, like special forces. The Marine Corps doesn't need any special forces because every Marine's special and things like that. So I learned like all the moon phases and like the phases of the tides and all kinds of like advanced navigation and all kinds of stuff. And I got to the Marine Corps and I realized that a lot of it really is set up for like the lowest tier. Like we need to get everyone across the finish line. So here's the amount of depth we'll go into things to get you across the finish line. If you want to be up here, like you need to go above and beyond on your own to do that, which I didn't mind doing it. It was a hobby of mine at the time. And I've always been interested in stuff like that. But I just thought it'd be a lot more intense and I thought it'd be harder, actually. And it wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. And then really quickly, when you get to the fleet, people start to settle back into like the new routine of, working and not working. And you're a Marine when you're on, and when you're off, like you're off and like it's done for you there and stuff like that. Yeah. And then pretty quickly we started getting moved around because, at that time period, there was a lot of deployments going on in 2 theaters, a lot of people coming and going. So we got there, I think in December of 2008, and then did around that same time period, we did like a double CAX for 2 units when it was called CAX. And then like right from there to like Fort Bragg, and then right from there to like another CAX in the summer, and then assigned to a unit to start the work up to deploy that, the end of 2009. Yeah. So we did a double CAX. It was like right in like December, January time period. For 2 different units. Do
you want to explain what CAX is for the non-Marine listeners?
Yeah, so CAX is so it's a combined arm exercise. So there's like tanks, artillery, the infantry's there training, the amphibious vehicles are there training, the helicopters and birds are there training. And we go out to a desert in 29 Palms, California, and essentially it's as if you're doing missions as if it's a real war and everyone is doing their part, and you're trying to see how well you all can combine your communications and your planning assets and essentially see how well your operations will roll out and find all of your discrepancies and fix those before you deploy into a real theater. So that's what those were. And it later changed its name to Mojave Viper, then Advanced Mojave Viper, and then something else after that. I don't remember what it was. What it is now. Yeah, but I mean, like, I feel like when you come in and an event is called something, even though the event stays the same, that the name changes, you always stick to the first thing it was called when you get in there.
For
sure. So I mean, to me, it's still CAX, and everyone else calls
EMV
it,
and all that.
EMV and stuff like that. Yeah. So, but we did a few of those. We did the Bragg exercise, and then by then we were already starting to get stabilized to deploy with 3-6 to the first Marjah push. So we did all of the work up with them, and then when they would have off times, they would send us back to 10th Marines to do stuff with 10th Marines as well, and then right back to 3-6. So that whole year of 2009 was pretty much a whirlwind of going back and forth and doing two different types of field ops, with the Victor units, doing all of theirs, and then coming back to 10th Marines and supporting the regiment as a whole there. And then we deployed at the end of 2009, beginning of 2010 is when we all got into country. We came at a few different elements came at different times, but that's about the time period we all got in there.
This whole workup period, you were a Lance Corporal during this time? Okay, so During this whole workup period, you're a Lance Corporal. What did you know as a Lance Corporal about what you were getting ready to go do? Like, because, and for those that are listening, like you guys, 3-6 went into Marjah. Marjah, no one had really been into Marjah before that, right? That was a kind of a Wild West area. There were probably some missions and some patrols in that area, but the actual city center of Marjah hadn't been an established footprint from the U.S. military at that point. So you coming up and being a junior guy and kind of seeing, and I will say that being a forward observer, a scout, whatever you want to call it, you do get a little peek behind the curtain and get a little better understanding of the bigger picture rather than the normal like 0311 Lance Corporal that's just told to, go that way or clear that house or whatever. So what kind of information were you receiving, and were you kind of, I don't know, did it make you nervous? Were you excited? Like how were you feeling as a new guy?
I was pretty excited because, if you spend your whole life to be like a race car driver, you want to race the car, you know what I'm saying? If you join the military because you want to be a fighter, like you want to go be a part of that. No one wants to join the military and do 20 years and be like, well, I never deployed. I never got to do what I trained for 20 years to do. I just trained for 20 years, essentially. No one wants that. So I think the feeling amongst all of us was pretty excited. Some of the other guys were a little younger, so I think they had a little bit more nervousness than I had. But in general, everyone was pretty excited. There was no real scouts who deployed in the form of doing their jobs that were ahead of us. All of our peers, they were like, well, we were all in Iraq. There were no big guns were shooting. We weren't dropping a lot of air at this time. We were doing a lot of handing out soccer balls and things like that. So they were just like, you're all going to freaking die. Or they were like, oh, you're going to sit in a COC and do nothing. And like it's not that they weren't really not helpful, but they just didn't have that real experience of what it would be like. And so I spent a lot of my time talking to the mortar FOs with 3-6 that had deployed and did the previous Iraq deployment just before that and said, hey, you fire mortars? What was it like and this and that? And how'd you do it? And for people who don't know the difference between like a mortar FO and an artillery FO, they're very relaxed and they'll just talk and use the first names. And it's just like, hey, I'm here, shoot north of me a couple hundred meters. And like, they'll be like, yeah, we can shoot that, because their piece of eye for their impact is not nearly as big as like a 155 round hitting somewhere and stuff like that. So there's not as many restrictions on it. It doesn't go as high, doesn't go as far. They're organic to that squad that's there, and that's where like the command, the authorization can be called from them rather than being called back for something bigger. So I just went off of their experiences and talked to them. And at CAX, we did a CAX with them in the fall of 2009. Yeah, I guess it was around August we went there, and I watched them do it, and they're like, "You can do it for us," and vice versa. So I got some of that, and then we shot a lot of 155s out there and stuff too. So like that was my first real experience of doing it with the full company that I was going to be deploying with. So I just figured deploying would be very similar to that, and it was to an extent. It was a little bit more restricted when you're when you're in country and there's a lot more risk, both of civilians and other friendlies in the areas and stuff like that. But it was pretty similar overall. So I think that whole workup did a pretty good job of preparing us to go there. I don't think we got there and we were clueless in what was going on.
Yeah. So when you guys first went to Afghanistan, did you already know that you're going to be going into Marjah and clearing that area, or was there a different mission and then it switched to that?
No, we knew that's what we were going to do.
So were you guys preparing for that clearing operation that you were going to be undertaking?
Correct. Yeah, we did a lot of like rock walks and a lot of looking at the big sand tables and talking about it, and everyone going over their parts and plans and contingencies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whole lot of that happened. And then when we got to Afghanistan, we had a couple weeks before we actually were going to go and do the insert. So we also just prepped for the initial invasion part of it there and went over things. And found weaknesses in our armor and tried to fix those before we'd go into it and find them, when you're actually on the two-way rifle range and stuff like that, rather than
For sure.
back training.
Were you guys staged out of Leatherneck or something like that? Or was it even built
So we
there?
started in Leatherneck. We started at Leatherneck, and it was half built, and then we moved to Dwyer. And when we got to Dwyer, there was like 3 tents and a couple Hescos, and like that was it. And then when we flew back through Dwyer was like a huge, like it was like a full base and stuff like that.
Yeah,
It
they
was crazy.
bring in those shipping container like housing units. The chews is what they call them. We used to call them. We called them cans in Iraq, but when I went through Dwyer, in 2011, it was pretty built up. Nothing like Leatherneck, obviously, but it was still like not a bad place to be hanging out.
Yep.
Now that since you guys were there and you had a couple weeks before the invasion started, were you just staying on base and just doing kind of, refinement on base, or did you guys go out on any actual patrols outside of the wire just to kind of get your feet wet a little bit?
So Dwyer was quite small, and I mean, you would just go a little bit and you'd be past the Hesco and it was just a desert.
Oh, okay.
We were just like, this whole area is your training area. Go and use it. So for weeks, we just used all of that area.
Okay. Yeah. I was only at Dwyer for like a day, so I don't even really know. So it's out in the middle of nowhere then, huh? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, actually the only time I went to Dwyer was when I flew in with 3-6. That's where we went to as well. So where did your like preparations focus? Like what, you guys inserted via helicopter, right? Was there any ground inserts on the 3-6 side?
Not initially. So everyone, both with 1-6 and 3-6, they had those ground elements. So for 3-6 on the north and for 1-6 is on the south. And then they flew in the center elements and dropped them off. And that's where all the fighting began. And then those ground elements moved in to join up with us.
Okay.
And it took them a little while to get in there.
So you were part of the elements that flew into the center and just kind of started hooking and jabbing from the get-go. What company, platoon, and all that were you attached to?
So I was with Kilo Company, and I was in I spent most of my time with 1st Platoon, and I spent most of my time with 3rd Squad. But I was the only forward observer, so all the time the other platoons and the other squads would they'd be like, "Hey, you want to come out with us?" And just all the time I'd go out, and it was me. There was a mortar FO named Greer, and then we had one radio operator, and then we had our officer FO that was there, but he stayed in the COC and would be the bigger picture talking to me, and vice versa. Our radio operator spent most of the time in the COC with him, and then me and Greer would just kind of flop between all. He spent most of the time with 3rd Platoon. I spent most of the time with 1st, and then 2nd we would just kind of fill in the gaps where needed.
So,
and vice versa. If he was gone, but there was some big patrols going on or some big movement at contact, and they wanted somebody else, I would just like jump in ship and you go with whoever was going out.
So that you bring up a good point, how your forward observer. So for those that are out there and aren't in the artillery world, the artillery officer is actually the forward observer on the team. That's his actual title. Whereas you're the scout or the fire support man, and then the radio operator, obviously. A lot of times, like what you had happen, the FIST, the fire support team, which is a artillery officer, an artillery scout, like a senior scout, maybe like a junior scout, like a radio operator, stuff like that. That's how the fire support team is built. A lot of the times when we're attached to an infantry battalion, the battalion sees the value of having another officer and a radio operator, because let's be honest, the radio operators coming from artillery are usually really good because they have to be. It's like a forced thing to become good at your job when you're having to get comms with elements that are miles and miles away. So a lot of the times the radio operators artillery battalions have are pretty good. And correct me any of this that's wrong that you may have seen, but when like my team attached to 3-6, our radio operators became like the company radio chiefs. Our officers became the like senior watch officers for like the companies and stuff, and also did their fire support and even information operation duties that they were tasked with. And then it all comes down to the scout is the one that is actually going out and doing everything. And this weird, I don't even know why I love the radio operator should definitely continue to be there, but I think we need to put more emphasis on comm training for scouts, or they should do it on their own to, do it, because when in reality, you're not going to have a radio operator there to come help you. Like, it's on you to have your radios ready on the right nets, on the right, everything like that, ready to go. So, I think your deployment is not unique in that way. Whereas that's kind of how it is. So for all the guys that are out there listening that are artillery officers, even if you go out as a forward observer, you're probably going to end up in the COC. So don't get too upset about that. So, when you were out now, when you guys were, well, let's back up before you guys helicoptered in. You want to talk about, were you there for that like moto speech that became super famous? That Gunny, he was a company Gunny gave a speech.
So that was 1-6, that really famous Gunny speech. I will tell you about a funny speech that we had though, when we were going to go. So they initially said, you're going to get heloed in, and then we'll be able to support you within 3 days. I think it took them like 13 days to finally get to us, but they said 3 days. And like that was the number going around as we're preparing. Like 3 days of water, 3 days of food, this and that, 3 days of ammo, 3 days of batteries. And we get there, and I think it was a company master sergeant or something, was talking to all of us the day before we flew out. And he goes, 3 days. He's like pausing, 3 days. And somebody in the very back of the room just screams, "For a lifetime of glory!" And everyone just like bursts into laughter and cheering and stuff like that. So that's our funny moto story. We always joke and still be like, 3 days. And but then we got the same moto speech, and then we all went out to the flight line, and then got held there. And then we didn't fly out the day we thought we were going to. Came back for a few hours, flew out the next day, and then we inserted. So it was kind of a lot of waiting, like, are we going, are we not going, what's going on?
Pretty typical of the military, right?
Yeah.
Can you kind of go through the emotions that you might have been feeling at the time when you were like on the helicopter, like flying in, like, holy shit, dude, we're about to go like legitimately raid, this town?
So we were told that it was the largest aerial invasion type operation since the end of the Korean War. I don't know how true that was, but that's what all the air wing guys were telling us. And when we first got there, we had a couple Spectre gunships on station. We had like a section of like Apaches from the Army on station. We had a lot of Purple Air on station. There's like a lot of assets. We had LAR surrounding all of Marjah. And when we flew in, my squad that I was in from my platoon was going to be the furthest south element. The way it broke up, we were going to have a large number here, and to the south, we were going to be down here, kind of making like a triangle. So we were going here. So we took off and flew first, and we put everyone on the bird. And I spent most of my time with the squad leader. His name was Raymond Shafars. He was great. We all called him Chief. Good friend of mine. I still talk to him all the time. He and I, we were like some of the last few to get on the bird, and we flew off. We got on a 47, and it left the tail open. And we took off and left, and we all had nods on. We're just watching, and we just see all of these birds taking off. And it was just like a sea of birds taking off because we left Dwyer, went to Leatherneck, staged at Leatherneck, and that's where we all flew from because that's where all the aircraft were. And it was just crazy seeing all of those birds flying, just a huge line of birds, and seeing like mixed skids flying along in support of it and stuff like that. And we all got dropped off. We were all super excited. We thought there was going to be just tons of shooting and fighting right out of the gate, but we got there, it was dark out. So it was just like silent. We just dropped like thousands of Marines all over, and it was just quiet. So it's like, oh, all right, we're here. Nothing's going on. Let's get to our spots. And we started trekking through the woods. It was freezing cold. Couldn't see where we were going. Everyone's afraid to use white lights or red lights because I think it's just going to start a huge firefight. And we finally make it to this compound that we're supposed to go hold. As soon as we get in it, the sun's coming up on the horizon, and as soon as we all got inside this compound, a huge ID went off right at the corner of the doorway.
No way.
There was like two roads meeting by the doorway. Huge ID goes off. So then right away, everyone's like super tense. And this compound's full of people, mainly women, a couple men, and a bunch of children. And we go and start talking to them, and they all panic, and they all just like get up, and they all just like flee and leave. And they just like run through the field way south, just getting away from there. And half the people are like, stop them. Half the people are like, let them go. Get them out of here. And then a few minutes after the sun came up, a whole bunch of firing began. And
that was it, huh?
That was the beginning of it.
Kickoff.
That was it.
Did someone...
Yeah, for the whole deployment.
How did that IED that went off get initiated?
We don't know for certain. Our squad leader says that he saw a piece of rope and thought it was like marking rope for farming. and picked it up and was like playing with it, and then it went off. So we don't know if somebody initiated it or if he had something to do with it or
so
what
like
it was.
Pull string or something like that.
It was just like someone's like, there's a rope here. He's like, I used to be a farmer. These are it's to mark your vegetable gardens. And it was like right after that.
That's crazy. What a way to start though, right?
Oh yeah. All right. Yep. I mean, as soon as the sun came up.
So you guys were told, hey, 3 days, we're going to be in there to resupply you after 3 days. What did they expect you to carry? Like, what was the average load that people were carrying? Can you kind of go through like the loadout?
Yeah. So I carried a Black Hawk Titan backpack, in case you guys don't know what those are. Those ones you could just buy from the PX that were like the same size as your regular pack, just a few more pouches on it. I carried a 117. I carried a 152. I carried 4 batteries for the 117, 4 batteries for the 152. I carried 2 100-ounce bladders of water. I carried a bunch of ammo, probably like 300 or 400 rounds of ammo. I carried 3 MREs. I packed a sleeping bag. One other guy packed a poncho, and no one else packed anything because, like, we don't need that stuff. So we're out there trying to go to bed freezing, and no one's got anything to cover up with except for me and one other guy. And what else? I mean, we're getting ready to leave. Some guy hands me an ICOM with a couple spare batteries. And they're like, yeah, you can use this to find the bad guys, and like an earpiece for it.
Yeah.
I had my Vector. I had my dagger. And I did not bring the tripod for it. And then I brought a toolkit, like a miscellaneous toolkit. And my pack was pretty heavy with all that. And then, I mean, people brought tons of ammo. One guy had a small. We brought like 6 or 7 rockets for it. We brought a couple AT-4s. Brought a couple laws.
You guys were carrying the backpackable Mikliks too, right? The line clearing charges.
So we weren't initially. We trained with them, but we weren't carrying them. We're on the bird ready to go, and a bunch of engineers are running up to the birds, and they just start screaming, carry these, and just start throwing them in over us, like into the bird, like minutes before we leave. So we're like, we're carrying these too, and they were on the old Alice pack frames. So everyone's all super weighed down. So what we did is like a couple people would buddy up and also carry a Miklik pack, and one guy would carry the Miklik launcher, and they would just, because you know how they come in pairs back then?
Okay.
So just tons. I mean, people were just throwing tons of stuff at us.
So let me break this down for maybe our non-military people. A 117 is like a larger radio. Did you have the Fox or Golf? I imagine it's the Fox, right?
Whichever one was the newer one.
The small one. Okay, so you had the
No. The big one that took 2 batteries, but was the newest one at the time.
That's the 117 Fox. So that's a pretty heavy radio.
Yep.
That's on its own carrying around. I mean, it's not like the heaviest thing in the world, but it's definitely not something you want to carry if you don't have to. A Golf.
Yeah, pre-lithium batteries.
Yeah,
too.
The 117 Golf is the same radio, except it's half the size and only takes 1 battery. So, at the time, I don't think those had come out, or they were so new they weren't really letting anyone use them. The 152 is like a walkie-talkie. Think of like a walkie-talkie, but bigger, a little heavier. And then the what else did you say there? Oh, the ICOM.
The ICOM chat radio is like a standard walkie-talkie size.
Yeah, exactly. That's your normal walkie-talkie. It's funny, in 2013, our linguist that we had when I was in Sangin with the advisor team, he would talk to the Taliban dudes on the ICOM. He would talk shit to them. They'd be like, we're going to fucking chop your heads off. He's like, fuck you pussies. We're going to kill you all. And they're just like going back and forth. His name was Zap. And we're like, Zap, quit talking shit to the Taliban. Like, what are you doing, dude? But that's the kind of radio that is. The Vector Dagger is a laser rangefinder. The Dagger is a GPS that connects to it so that you can get really good locations for stuff that you're lasing and stuff like that. So, yeah, man, I mean, it seems like a pretty heavy loadout. When you guys got to that compound, were you staging gear there, or was that just a spot for you to initially roll up into, and then you're backpacking everything to the next place? Like, were you guys constantly on the move?
Well, correct. We thought that's what we were going to do, but we ended up that first major compound that was our waypoint was a good position, so we ended up staying there. That's where we stayed there for the first 13 days.
Okay.
And when going there, we had a ton of weight. A bunch of us, our bladders had popped. One of my 100-ounce bladders popped and leaked all over me, and it was freezing that night. Out.
So you were told to be prepared for 3 days of combat actions, and then you'd get resupplied and stuff like that. How long did it actually take before you got resupplied?
We left that area like 13 days later, and we kind of consolidated at a big spot because we were going to now move from this area that we held over to. So this was like Marjah proper, the city, and my company was going to move to a part that was further to the east, and it was called 5 Points or
Oh,
Raleigh.
yeah.
If you ever hearing about that. So we went and consolidated back in Marjah proper, and moved from there over to Raleigh. So we only were we took that Marjah proper in the first 13 days, moved consolidated, stayed 2 or 3 days there, and then did this big movement over to 5 Points.
So if you weren't getting resupplied after 3 days, what were you guys doing for like food and water?
We started eating their chickens and boiling water, and then if we couldn't boil the water, I would just drink it out of the canal. The others would too, but a lot of them would get sick. In the Marine Corps, a bunch of my buddies called me the Iron Stomach because I could eat and drink anything and I would never get sick. They would all eat and drink stuff and get sick all the time.
Yeah, I mean, dude, drinking canal water, that's a gamble right there. You're gambling.
Well, it's been like 2 days and you don't have any water. It's looking real good.
That's
at that
true,
point.
man. That's damn, man. That's it's stuff like that it's hard for regular people to understand. Like, it's situations like that where you're so desperate, you're drinking nasty canal water, where like it makes you appreciate the finer things in life. The small things in life, being able to go turn on your tap. Like, I love how people complain about this water tastes nasty. I would never drink this city water, and they go get bottled water and shit. I'm like, dude, the rest of the world wishes they had water like that, and you're complaining about it. Maybe it could be better, yeah, but like the complaints that people have about shit like that just blows my mind.
Yeah.
So can you talk about like your first like sustained firefight, like the first time you were actually engaging, being engaged and engaging back the enemy?
Yep, it was that very first day, right when the sun came up, and we got there like just at like still civil twilight, essentially, like just starting to see light over the horizon, and we started taking stuff from this compound and building, because the walls were like 12 feet tall there, building a bunch of posts in all the corners. And on the south side, which was our focus, we built 3 sets of posts there. And we put up Americans in all the corners, and we put in Afghanis in the center, because we had 4 Afghanis that were with us. And they started shooting at the center Afghani, which we joked and called him Jackie Chan because he looked very Asian. And he was a very entertaining, fun guy to talk and chat with. But they started shooting at him. He was the only one up on post at the time. He started screaming and ducking down. And we tell him to fire back, and he racks his M16 a bunch of times and starts shooting in the air. And I say, no, you need to look and aim. He goes, no, sir, it's good. And just starts shooting up. So I was like, get off there. And I climb up there, and we all just start shooting back. And I remember thinking, like, right away, like, it's not as scary as I thought it was. I don't know if it's because I'm older or because I played a bunch of video games or what. But, like, I thought I'd be terrified, but feels like being on a rifle range.
Do you think you had that mentality because at that point you hadn't seen anybody get hit yet?
I mean, maybe before going in, I read both On Combat and On Killing, and I tried to build up, that mental fortitude and mental toughness that Grossman talks about in those books. And I try to like do a lot of, tactical decision-making games where you envision yourself in these situations and play them over and over again and what you would do to try to prepare for it, to build file folders for when those situations arise. And I just felt like pretty calm overall. And I mean, I don't know. Some of the younger guys seemed pretty scared. Some of them seemed real excited. I didn't seem very scared. I was like, I remember clearly thinking like, it's not near as scary as I thought it was going to be. Like, now it's time to like start working. And then it was almost like people say, it's like muscle memory, but muscles don't have memories. Your brain has neurological pathways. So like those start working, you know what I'm saying? And you start going back to your training and things that you've done and things you're prepared for.
Sure. Yeah.
And then from then on, it was a firefight from like sun up to sundown every day for like the whole deployment, essentially. Really? Except for the poppy harvest.
Yeah, man. It's everyone deals with situations like that differently, and I think that's one of those things that we'll never probably understand that, but it's like you'll never know how someone's going to deal with a situation like that until they're in that situation. Unfortunately, people that you think are like the best dudes ever could crack and not not be able to do their job because it can be scary, especially when you start seeing casualties. When casualties begin occurring, that's when, the reality for a lot of people set in and stuff like that. At what point were you ever like called up to actually do your job as a forward observer rather than just being another rifleman firing back? When did you do your first fire mission?
First day, right away. Yep. We had a set of guns. So we set up Fiddler Green to the south. And we also had a set of guns that was to the north at what we called the ANCOP at the time. And it was just a spot that was north of Marjah where they essentially built the command. That's where the command was going to stay, just north of the city. And the very first day, we called in 155 dumb rounds, and they got approved and fired for us. At my position, there was a huge cluster of compounds to the south. They had a huge wall with, essentially it was like a big row of compounds, several deep, several wide, with a big wall there. And they were using tons of positions there to fire at us, to the people that were to our west, and to the element that was like south and stationed in between the two of us. It was like a huge, there was tons of fighters. There's machine guns firing, AKs firing, sniper fire coming from there. And we called for approval right away, and they approved it, and they fired them. And I'll never forget what it was like. For those of you who don't know what artillery sounds like, if you fire it overhead and it's low coming in, because it was pretty close to us, about 600 meters away, it sounds like woo, boo, 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 just like that. And so it's Marjah. Everyone's excited. We're going to do this huge invasion. Every asset's like, we're going to fire as much as we can. We want to do all kinds of stuff. We're going to use air. We're going to do rockets, everything. We want to fire it all. And, all the troops are looking to fight. We call in for these missions. They fired tons of rounds for us, and it flew right overhead. And all of these infantrymen had never heard it before. So from overhead, we hear a ton of, and they all start jumping off their posts and like running to get inside and screaming like, "What's that? What's that?" And I'm just like, "Oh, it's me. It's me. It's just dumb rounds. It's 155s." And they started impacting where we're shooting. And then they're all like, "Oh yeah," right back into the fight again.
Do you know who was shooting for you? What battery?
No, I don't remember. There was a couple batteries, and they broke them up between, I think it was 110 was one of them, and I don't remember who the other one was. But what would happen is, when we got into Marjah, no one's radios worked, and no one could call back to Rifleman, which was our command, except for like my radio. So I would call to Rifleman, and then back there, they would determine the agency, send it out, and then call back to me and send the information back.
Oh, okay.
So,
so your call for fire was being relayed from you to someone in the rear, and then they were turning around and taking it and sending it again as if it was an original call for fire, basically.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And this obviously I don't know if you want to get into it later, we can talk about how this became an issue later on in the deployment. But what was your feelings when those first rounds started impacting? This is your first time doing a call for fire, and it's like real world. You're really being shot at.
I'm 24. We're doing this deployment. We're like, we're going to shoot everything. Let's get in there and, show these bad guys what's what. When you're young, so every male has the warrior gene, and they just want to fight and prove themselves, and then especially when you train for it and then go and do it, and you're there at a huge, like what they say is like going to be a historic event and stuff like that. And you have an opportunity to, because when you're there and you're young, you don't have big picture things. You're not like, well, we're clearing this area out so we can do sustained operations for years to come and bring in radio towers and wills. You're thinking like, some man higher up than us sent us into combat, and I'm here fighting with these guys. I'm going to do whatever I can to keep them safe. Like, that's what you're thinking about. And to be able to like bring in big guns and to like, essentially like give it to the enemy. Yeah. You just think that's great and exciting and stuff like that. And all the people that are there with you, it's a huge morale booster for everyone who's young and nervous, because we had 2 drops of boots that came to us, one like 1 week before we left and one like a day before we left. And a bunch of them are out there with us. So they were like, I'm at MCT like 15 days ago, and now I'm here in Afghanistan.
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So for some of them, and some of them performed super well. They were, they joined to serve their country, and they served their country well. And it was good to see them doing that. But anything that was a morale boost in an environment like that, because you talk about misinformation. When you're about to go into a place like that, they're like, analysts expect like 60% casualties with our company and this and that and stuff. That's absurd. Yeah. You'd be so combat ineffective. It's unrealistic, but just a lot of the, Lance Corporal Underground starts flying, and those rumors are just all over the place, and they have tanks there and this and that and Russian minefields everywhere.
Yeah.
And
it gets in your head.
So.
Yeah. It's funny that coming back to the noise you were talking about, the first time I ever heard that noise was after I lap moved. I got to 10th Marines in November of 2009, and it was my very first, I think I've told this story on here before, but it was my very first field op. I just come from Motor T. Now I'm an 08XX at that point, because I hadn't even been to MOS school yet. And 210's like, hey, we're going to the field. And for those that are familiar with Camp Lejeune, OP5 is an area right next to, it's like one of the main observation areas right next to the impact area. There's a big tower. There's a big open field area, and then like the berm, and then the impact area. And we're all set up. We set up our base X tent, the fire support coordination center and stuff like that. We're getting all set up and everything, and it's getting dark out, and they're like, hey, well, one, range control comes over, and they're like, hey, you can't be set up on this little hill, the little knoll that is at OP5 that the tower's on. They're like, you can't be set up there because that causes erosion of the hill. He's like, you're going to have to move all your stuff down there, and he points at a spot. And Gunny Klein was like, can we talk about this? Maybe we'll do it on the next field op, because we're completely set up. Like, all of our antennas are set up, all the OEs are set up and stuff like that. And he comes back, range control's like, all right, you can stay here for this field op. Next time, be down there, but you need to move your vehicle. So we move our vehicles. And we're sitting there, and we're waiting on the check round, right? Which is, for those that don't know, in artillery, the first round is called the check round. They shoot it, and all it is to make sure, like, hey, the round is going to impact in the impact area. There's an observer there watching, and he calls back, like, round observed safe, and he gives his spottings. And this first round, the check round, the safety round, we're sitting there, and I'm with Juan Delara, and we're listening to the radio, and I hear shot, target number, da 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 da, and you hear the poof off in the distance, and then I just hear boom, and this super loud explosion. I'm like, damn, like, that's a lot closer than, like, that's a lot louder out here by the impact area. And Delara was like, dude, that was too loud. And then we hear Klein, he's outside the base X, and he's super country for anybody that knows him. He's like, check fire, check fire. It just starts screaming check fire. And we're like, what the fuck? So we just start hitting every radio, check fire, check fire, check fire. And the round landed 50 meters from us, right where that range control guy told us that we should set up. The exact spot that he pointed to, that where he wanted us to tear down and reset, is where it landed. And I was like, holy shit, dude, like, that's crazy. And this is my first time. I'm like, what is going on out here with artillery? Maybe I shouldn't have moved into this, but I just wanted to add on that sound is a strange sound, and those that know what it is know what it is, and it's kind of a disheartening if you don't know that it's going to land out in a safe area and stuff like that. But anyway, how did, like, your actions as an observer, or you can just talk in general, your unit, how did they kind of shift? Like, how over the time of the battle, over the 13 days or whatever, I'm assuming that you guys showed up and you had a plan in mind. This is how we're going to do it. And then obviously real world comes into play, and you start seeing how some things are effective and some things aren't. How did your guys' kind of like game plan to fight the enemy shift, or at all, if it did at all, during that fight?
Really, we just did a lot of what we were told, and we didn't see the bigger picture. It was like, you guys are going to go here, and here's what we want you to do there. There's just a lot of that. Yeah. One thing that did change quite a bit is, like you talked about radio operators. Our company had a couple radio operators that were pretty good, but they generally got kept back at Raleigh, like the CP, once we got there. We did most of our operations out of 5 points in the Raleigh area. And Castagna, our radio operator, was in the CP the whole time. And I was, like you said, was very good at the radio. So I did a lot of the fills for people out at all the OPs that we established. I did a lot of that stuff. And also, I was mainly the voice for a lot of the patrols that would go out with the platoons or the squads that were going out to do anything like that. Because I had a radio, I was older, I could talk pretty clearly, and I ended up giving tons of intelligence to, I acted like as part of the intelligence cell, because we had one intel guy that stayed back at 5 points, because at first he would go out, but there's 3 platoons with 3 squads each. We got 9 elements going on all the time. It's hard for him to get what's going on there. Instead, I took it for my platoon. Greer took it. The mortar FO took it for the 3rd platoon. We both did it for the 2nd platoon, and we would feed him a lot of the intelligence of things that we saw and civilian movements and where the firefights took place and things like that, and where we found IEDs and when firefights when they would take place, and to build patterns of life, things like that. And so my role kind of switched. I spent a lot of time with the squad leader, and also, we spent a lot of time out at these OPs. We'd break down our element, and I would lead a few guys, and he would lead a few guys, and we just kind of switched throughout the day, because we had like X number of patrols they expected from us, X number of night patrols, things like that. I'd go out with the snipers almost every single night, and observe for them and talk to riflemen with other UAVs or air that we had and things like that. Some funny stories came about doing stuff like that. And I tried to just be like the jack of all trades for the company. One, to give our scouts a good name, and two, just to, every man just has a drive to be the best they can. I just felt like that was my way to contribute, because in the infantry, they're all, they're grunts and they're infantrymen and they're riflemen. And then outsiders are just pokes to them generally, unless you prove yourself to them. And I feel like I pretty quickly did that with my company and was used as a great asset with them and was proud to do that and glad to be a part of Fighting Six Marines in that capacity,
Yeah, man. No, I mean, you're part of history, bro. Like, I talked to, I think it was Daniel Gordon I was talking to about being in the invasion. They did, during the invasion of Iraq, he was in Mosul, which isn't something that people really talk about very often, how they flew into Mosul and kind of took that area. And it's like, dude, it's kind of weird to think about it, but if you step back and look at it, it's like you were part of an invasion force that took over another country and like defeated an enemy's army. You know what I'm saying? Like, as weird as that is to say out loud, like, you're part of history, and like that's just something. I don't know. It's just, for me, it's interesting to think about it in that way. You know what I'm saying? Can you kind of talk about how? You talked about all the stuff you were carrying when you first got there and in your loadout. Can you tell us how your loadout shifted over time as operations changed and how your understanding of the enemy also changed?
Yes. So we started establishing a bunch of OPs, which was really funny because there's this main route, and I think it was like 502 was the route. And it was the main road in between 5 Points and Marjah proper. Well, there was a bunch of problems with that route and enemy movements along them. So they had us establish 4 OPs along it. And there was like 16 miles between the two areas, some huge distance. So every couple of miles we built these OPs. And the first one we built, we went to the farthest one and built it, and we called it OP1 Kenobi. And then we went and built the second one, and we called it OP2 or OP, what do we call it? OP2D2 is what we called the second one. And then we called the third one OPC3PO, and we called the fourth one OP4 Calrissian, just because we're out of droid names or Star Wars names. So that's just we named them all Star Wars names along the way. And we set these up, and you would carry a large pack and have a lot of gear, carry it to your OP, and then there was always an element staying in the OP. So we would stage our stuff from there, and we launched all patrols north and south based on those OPs there. So I would carry my huge pack with the big radio, and when I got to the OP, I would leave my big radio there so we all could use it. I would only use the 152. I would take the ICOM chatter, and I bought off of some guy a Camelback Barrage, I think it was called. What it was called. It was a really small Camelback, probably like this big, but it had 2 pouches on it, and the big pouch would fit my Vector perfectly, and the top pouch would fit my Dagger and spare batteries perfectly. And I'd keep my extra antennas inside where the bladder went. And we did all patrols of that, and we tried to do patrols as light as possible. Because at first we had MTVs in huge packs. And for those of you who don't remember the MTV vest, it was this huge, giant vest designed to survive catastrophic ID blasts in Iraq.
Yeah.
I mean, no mobility, tons of weight. It just like broke your back just wearing it. And then in the middle of the deployment, we switched to the Eagle Industries plate carriers.
Those are nice. I like those.
And they were excellent. And we said, well, now we have mobility, because the problem we would have is we would get engaged. They started about 600 meters out. We would go to pursue them. They would move, keep engaging us while gaining ground, and then finally get to a spot where they'd hop in vehicles and be gone. And they would just wear us out. We'd chase them for kilometers, unable to gain ground on them, and then they'd be gone. Well, halfway through, we switched to all the light loads, and we would only maybe take 1 or 2 packs per the whole squad now while we were going out. Everyone else would be as slick as they could be. And we would try to use mobility as as an asset to move quicker, to catch these guys, stop, cut them off from getting away and things like that. And that did help quite a bit. And it was good to be able to have a staging place to put all your food, gear, and ammo and things like that, and then be able to just move later.
So were you guys going to the observation post, the OPs, and like you were staging there for like you're going to be there for a week?
Weeks at a time.
So you were just rotating. There were elements that were rotating out of these OPs, and once you got there, it was like, all right, I'm here for 2 weeks, and these are our patrol schedules that we have to take care of. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. how was life different between being at the OP and being back with the main element back at the I don't know what you want to call it, patrol base or cop?
Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's anywhere. The farther away from the flagpole you get, the more freedom you feel like you have. So we had a huge well just in front of this compound that we spent most of our time at. We built a big sandbag wall around it, and we all would just lounge in it like it was a hot tub in Silkies. And it was outside the wire. You're not supposed to leave without gear on, you know what I'm saying? But like, oh, no one's looking. And we built this big wall because they would always look with the G-boss and be like, hey, OP3, so-and-so doesn't have gloves on.
I was about to just mention
Get those gloves on. So we always joked and called the G-boss the Eyes of Sauron. So we would just build sandbag walls to block it off from us so we could go and swim and stuff like that, or walk around in our Silkies. And because they're like, you'll be in your gear all day. You know, like, go inside the building and then you can go down to skivvies with boots on and your gloves and stuff. But like,
I've actually,
we didn't want to do that.
I've actually been in the COC when I remember the ops chief for 3-6, I think it was the ops chief for 3-6's 2011 deployment, saw somebody on one of the cameras, was like, hey, tell that guy, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, really, man? You're micromanaging from like 20 miles away? Like, get out of here with that. So at this point, you know, I mean, obviously you were interacting with Afghans throughout this entire thing, like local civilians. Once you guys were kind of more established, you established these observation posts and you were running like presence patrols around them and stuff like that. What was kind of the vibe you were getting from the local populace and stuff? And did it change over time throughout the deployment?
So yeah, at the beginning, a lot of the locals were real scared of us. Months into it, you know, now it's become normal. We've been there together. We didn't do anything oppressive to them. We didn't try to destroy a lot of their stuff, anything like that. You know, we would talk to them. We had a really good interpreter with us that was a 60-year-old man named Aziz from California that would just, you know, let me go talk to the people for a little while. Like, yeah, you go ahead. See what, you know, where they need help and stuff like that. And then he would put out the word like, you know, if you have hurt kids, you need medicine and stuff, come talk to us and, you know, we'll help you out. So all the time we'd have people showing up like, my kid's ill. He's got a bad fever. Can you give him something? We would give him pills. One kid cut his arm really bad on a piece of farm equipment, and our doc stitched them all up and took care of him out there and had him come back a couple of days to check on him. And so I think like the main locals didn't have a problem. We'd have some Taliban fighters that would come, and some would get killed when they were trying to flee, and they would have the locals go and ID them, and they're like, they're not from around here. We don't know who they are. They're not from around here. They'd come from somewhere else. So a lot of the fighters were coming up from other places to do the fighting and then leave. We had this guy. This is one of my favorite stories about my first deployment. We had this guy we called the watermelon guy. And for those of you who don't know, generally forward observers go to like a GFO course. They learn to talk to aircraft and things like that. I talked to a lot of aircraft while I was there. I flew a few Americans out who got wounded, and I flew some Afghans out who got wounded, and I flew some locals out who got wounded. And talking to air is awesome. They're really calm, really relaxed. You just give them some instructions, and they can work with anything pretty much. We had this guy, watermelon guy. It's getting close to the end of our deployment. Super hot, and he would always travel to Lashkar Gai, which was east of us, and come back to Marjah proper. And we'd be like, "Can you get us some watermelons?" He'd bring us a bunch of huge watermelons, and we loved them. We're like, "Oh, this is awesome." He's leaving one time, and we start hearing a bunch of shooting. There was a small cluster of compounds just a little bit west of where we were. Couple hundred meters, hear a bunch of shooting, and we hear one of the guys that's up on post scream, "They're shooting the watermelon guy! They're shooting the watermelon guy!" So we're like, gear up! And we run out like half a squad to go check on him, and they shot him and then left in white vans, and they were gone. And we get there, we open the door, and he shot a bunch, and we're like, "Oh, he's gone! Call air for him. Throw purple smoke for him, pull him to a field where this bird can land," and we're all disappointed. He flies away, and we're like, "Dang, he's gone." I come back. I'm like, "Dude, he's not going to make it. He was shot a ton of times, dude. He's gone." We're there. We hear a horn honk a couple months later, and we look. This car pulls up. He gets out with watermelons, and we're like, "Watermelon man!" And he comes in, and he's like, "Look at oh, my teeth. America's so good." Like, lifts up his shirt. He's got, like, wounds all over and, like, patches and, like, skin grafts. And he's like, "Oh." He's like, "My hearing good." Like, had a beard, like he had a haircut and cleaned up and everything. He's like, "So good." He's like, "Teeth are fixed. Amazing." They flew him away, fixed his gunshot wounds, and then fixed everything else and brought him back. And it just made him love America even more. Cool. So he kept bringing watermelons to us. And on our rip, we ripped with, I think 2-9, and it was Golf Company specifically. And there was a guy that was at 10th Marines for a little while that replaced me, Dorman, I think. replace me. And when we're doing the rip, we're like, this is Watermelon guy. Y'all protect him, okay? He's a vital asset. All right, make sure he's all right. He's all right. And then they just continued, having him get them watermelons through that whole deployment as well.
Cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we had we would also medevac people, locals and stuff, that if they were injured. I remember multiple times we had either like kids pulled boiling water over on themselves on accident, or because they all cook on propane. For those that don't know, it's hard to understand the agrarian society that is the countryside of Afghanistan unless you've kind of seen it, where you're like, oh, okay, well, they all live in mud huts. They sleep outside on rugs at, when it's hot in the summertime. They all cook on little propane stoves and propane fires. They bathe and drink and everything from the canal. Like, it's a very, I don't know how you want to describe it. It's a very rustic kind of living. And, we had multiple casualties from kids, like, burning themselves on cooking fires. I think a propane tank exploded one time and stuff like that. And we would try to get them out there because one, obviously it's the right thing to do, right? And two, obviously it doesn't hurt the cause. If we're trying to show that we're here to help, then that's one of the things that we got to do to show that we're here to help, is kind of help these people out medically and stuff. And for a lot of those people, the medical treatments and stuff that you're describing, even having like a simple examination is something a lot of them have never even experienced before. And
diarrhea medicine.
Yeah. It's it's hard for people to understand that kind of lifestyle unless you've kind of seen it. And I come back to it. It makes you appreciate, what we have here and the different things that, the ability to kind of do whatever you want here in the United States compared to how those guys and girls and stuff are living over there. As time kind of went on, did you think that you guys were having, or did it seem like you guys were having a big difference in the city? Like, did you notice a lack of fighters starting to, like, were replacements for the fighters coming, or was it sustained? It seemed like it was a never-ending cycle of foreign fighters come in. And real quick, before you answer, I will say that while we were in Sangin, the local Taliban guys, the guys that were from Sangin and were aligned with the Taliban dudes, were actually getting into fights with the foreigners that were coming in and fighting against us as well, because the foreigners that were coming in to fight were way more aggressive, didn't care. They didn't care about the locals. They would treat them like shit. They would shoot them. They'd kill them and stuff like that. And that became like an issue. So I just wanted to add that to the point that you made, that there were a lot of foreign fighters there.
Yes. Have you read the book, The Fighters?
I haven't.
Have you heard about it? So for you or for any listeners who want to read about this, the initial invasion of Marjah from 3/6, there's a man named SSgt Chivers, and he's a Pulitzer Prizing journalist that wrote a book called The Fighters, and he features my platoon commander, me, and a bunch of other people by name in this book, specifically talking about the invasion of Marjah. So it's on Amazon and everything. It's called The Fighters, SSgt Chivers. And yeah, like you said, the foreign fighters. So an example is we were just doing a basic patrol, and as the months would go on, we were gaining more and more ground, it seemed like. We would kill or push them out of these areas that they were holding, and we would take a foothold to it to where the bubble around our area was getting bigger and bigger. And then they were bringing more and more foreign fighters up, and as the deployment went on, more and more the locals came back too, because like, oh, these problem people are now gone, so like I can return to my home, because where all these homes were, they were fighting out of these people's homes. Well, now we've taken all those, and that's within our AO now. Mm-hmm. So essentially, we patrol by those every single day. No one comes up there and bothers them. If they do, they would warn us about it. And we got in a fight with a group of fighters who came up way from the south in a white van, got out, started attacking. We were pursuing them, and we were right on them. And we saw them running through a field, and one of them turned and shot a farmer in the stomach from like 5 feet away. He falls down. They keep going. We get there. We pick up the farmer, take him back to cover, and render aid to him, and no longer pursue them. So they're like, oh, if we just shoot locals, they'll stop and render aid, and we can get out of here. Mm-hmm. So in the middle of the deployment, they started doing things like that. And we'd have to take these civilians and fly them out of there, get them aid. And they knew that we wouldn't follow them after that, because that was that, essentially. Because now at this point, we've cleared out the whole area. We're trying to hold it and start the rebuild phase of it. Mm-hmm. So that these people can get back with their lives, and we can also operate within this area. So that was something that happened. And if we took too much ground at a certain area, they would probe the lines and find the weakest area, and then focus in on that and bring in a lot of activity. We would plus up our efforts there, force them out of there, and they would probe around again and find somewhere else and start coming back in there. And it's just kind of a lot of cat and mouse up until we left.
Yeah. Did you guys find certain areas that were like, hey, if we cross this line, we're going to get attacked? Like, no matter what?
All the time. Oh, yeah, all the time. Those lines shifted, too, as we would, because once we found those lines, we would make a big effort to push further into them and remove those lines. But there were certain spots where it was like, yeah, don't go this way, don't go that way, don't go this way. That's definitely going to happen. Well, like, you would cross the lines if you wanted to fight. Yeah. They'd be like, hey, I want you to do a contact patrol today. So go and you know where to go. And we'd be like, we'll go to this one and it'll start right here. We would go, start right there.
And now as a fire support man, knowing that you're going to be crossing an area where, hey, if we cross this line, we're going to get attacked. What were you doing? Were you doing like fires planning ahead of time? Like, hey, let's go ahead and make pre-planned targets and stuff because we know this is where we're going to get a shot from.
The entire deployment, I made tons of pre-planned targets, gave them all to our FO who was back, and he would pass them up to the main fire cell, which was where our command was, which was called Rifleman. And we had pre-planned targets all over the place. And then, I called a lot of fire support. We called rockets, mortars. We called everything except for naval guns there. We had some Spectre airships there. We had, we had A-10s come through. We had mixed skids. We had that patch of, or that section of Apaches at the very beginning. Mm-hmm. We called all kinds of fire support. As the deployment went on, it seemed like more and more they would, because the Afghan government would say like, oh, you can shoot at mosque and religious things like that if they're all in it and they're killing locals and this and that, and you can get them out of there. And then it changed to no, don't fire anything like that. And it changed to any building with a speaker on it that they even pray out of, like, you can't do that. So they started trying to like make more buildings, more speakers are going up and more places are becoming prayer centers. And they would just kind of use those as like, caches and stuff like that. And then at the end of the deployment, it was like, we don't want you going into those. So like the Afghans could go in, but we would just go and set the coordinate and let them go and look for the stuff.
Yeah.
By the end of it.
Yeah. I saw the, on the following year when I was there as the fires chief, I got a list of the no strike list. And it's all the little, it's like circles on the map of all the mosque or like locations where for whatever reason they're on the no strike list. A lot of them were mosque or, mosque with scare quotes there. It was sometimes difficult because, like you said, they were for sure definitely using those as meeting locations, planning locations, staging weapons, staging fighters and stuff like that. And the ROEs were just so, trying to work around some of the ROEs was just kind of difficult. And on that, as you were there, did you see any major shifts in the ROEs and like what you were approved to do at the beginning, maybe, and not approved to do at the end?
Yes, we joked about it how it was like the Wild West at the beginning. They were very lax, and then by the end, it would just it would become more and more constricted towards the end of it, to where now, if there's even a mosque in any of the effects radiuses of any of the munitions you're trying to fire, like, it's not even gonna go. Like, I'm trying to hit this building. Yeah, but the piece of eye is still like 14% that a fragment may come down and land in this compound. Like, so no, you're disapproved for it. And a lot of the fire support was ramped up at the beginning and slowly ramped down at the end, to where at the end, I was just doing a lot of 81s and 60s. And, Excalibur got shut down like halfway through the deployment due to some GPS errors. Mm-hmm. There was the huge Highmars incident that shut down Highmars for a while there. The RREs, where you can't have any effects hitting things that are prayer centers or religious buildings, cut a lot of 155s out, because a lot of the areas we're fighting are all those. It's all open fields. They're not fighting in the middle of the open fields. They're in the clusters of compounds while we're in the open fields. So trying to get something approved for that, it mainly was a lot of Illum. Like 155 Illum was like, at the end of the deployment, was like the main asset we would call, other than 81s and 60s.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. The ROE constraints, I get it. I understand some of it to a point, but I think a lot of commanders take the intent of the ROEs and go above and beyond and make them even more restrictive because they're looking out for their own hide, and I personally have been under fire, accurate fire, almost being shot. and having my fire missions denied because I remember in one specific instance, the guy was standing next to a mud wall. It wasn't even a compound. It was like a mud wall in a field. And it was like, dude, this dude is like literally shooting inches from my head right now. And I couldn't, and I have a Harrier on target, but no approval. 3-4 wouldn't do it. I was just like, shit like that is very frustrating. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Yep. So you mentioned two things, the XCal. For those that may not be aware, like Excalibur rounds or the GPS guided, what it is, it's like a GPS kit that's put on a round, on a 155 round, a howitzer round. At that time, when you were there, the Marine Corps, maybe the Army as well, but the Marine Corps, I know, were still working through all their test rounds. So that's why there was an issue while you were there, is because they were still going through their inventory of test rounds, which weren't perfect. And then once those were shot out, once we finished up with those and they got the actual, like, hey, here's our final style round or whatever, then I think a lot of the issues that they were having before, because there was some dudding issues and stuff like that was occurring. I think a lot of that was no longer a case. In my own experience, we didn't get to really use XCal. I didn't get to shoot XCal at all on my 2011 deployment because the time of flight was just so long, because everywhere, no one was fighting around Fiddler's Green, around that area. You know, the fighting had kind of calmed down. It was all north of Marjah proper. So once you start looking at the time of flight, you know, for that, it was longer than Highmars. So we focused mostly on Highmars. And, you know, Highmars is an accurate, super great weapon. I'm sure you're aware, artillery right now, you know, they're revamping the artillery battalions in the Marine Corps. So instead of having one battalion of Highmars on each coast or whatever, now it's going to be one tube battery on each coast. You know, it's flip-flopping. So it's kind of a strange thing.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the Highmars incident from your deployment?
Yeah, I mean, I can.
Can you kind of explain? Can you kind of explain like what the actions of that day, what led up to the Highmars call for fire being executed, and then kind of what happened?
So it's 2 days into our landing in Marjah. It's February 14th, you know, and everyone jokes about how they want, you know, Valentine's Day massacre and things like that. And the battlefield was pretty chaotic. There was a lot of stuff going on. No one knows what happens for sure either. And, you know, as soon as it happened, I got talked to by a JAG officer and all this. And I don't know, I think the final determination was that there was a GPS error of some kind or something like that. So I'm to the south over here. Further south of me is a huge cluster of compounds that's shooting at a whole bunch of our elements. Only one radio is working, so people are passing things to me, and I'm passing it up, and then they're passing it up, and then it's coming back down. With Highmars, you're supposed to, what was our SOP for that time period was it's on the observer's command to fire. So if you call in a Highmars mission, it goes through the whole approval process, because it goes super high, so you have to clear a really high airspace. Comes back to you, and if you're still wanting it, it comes to you, and then you say, yes, I give approval fire, then it fires. Some Highmar missions got called in. It got passed through a whole bunch of elements, and then like hours later got fired and then hit a wrong target. And where I was, it hit the buildings right now, and the building had 12 civilians in it. It was like one man, like 6 women, and a bunch of kids. And they all were killed except for one like 4-year-old girl came walking out of it. And so that was like a real downer for all the people involved. That shut down Highmars for a while because the investigation happened. That shut down fire support for a while. And it's just a couple of days into when like the most chaotic portion of the initial invasion. Mm-hmm. And I mean, there's people like fighting all over. We got like birds dropping munitions. So I'm in the front. I'm doing like artillery, and we got mortars going, and we were shooting javelins, and we were having like fixed wing come in, and we're having like rotary wing come in. And I was doing some like type 2 controls with a JTEC that we had, and then our FAC was controlling some air also. So there's like different air assets doing things, but like not everyone knows what's going on. So it's really chaotic as a whole, and it hits the building next to us. And then the groups behind us thought it hit like the correct target. And then this girl walks out and we're like, oh, it's not the right target. Mm-hmm. And we have to go in there. And then we're taking a bunch of those new guys I was telling you about. And if you want to hear about this in detail, you can read the book From the Fighters, because it covers this quite a bit, because this was a big thing that happened for my specific platoon and the company at the time. And the piece of eye for a Highmars is like 13 meters. It's pretty small. It's really accurate generally and kills a lot just in a small area. And it went right into one room that had all the civilians and essentially killed them all. So I didn't talk to my wife for like 2 or 3 months into the deployment when we finally got like sat phones and got a chance to call. And I called and she's like, "Oh, you all right? You okay? Highmars, like I heard about it in the news. Like, what's going on? Is everyone safe and stuff?" And like, it was obviously a big enough deal that it made it back to the news and she heard about it back where she was,
Yeah.
So, the JAG officer got involved. A lot of people have speculations on what they think happened or didn't happen, but I don't even know if there's anyone that knows from start to finish, like the whole story clearly.
Really? Okay.
So, I mean, from your perspective, because you were back in the fleet now at 10th Marines at that time, were you not?
Yeah.
Didn't you just make it there?
Yeah, I was.
And you guys heard about it. What'd you guys get about it?
Honestly, the only thing I heard about it was on the news. There was no real talk about, what? So the weird thing is at 10th Marine Regiment at the time, it didn't seem like there was any elements that were taking information from what was happening overseas and actively like disseminating that amongst the battalions and the unit and kind of, adjusting training or whatever to kind of, shift for the focus of what's actually happening. So I never heard about it from 10th Marines or anyone even talk about it. I only saw it in the news. I remember reading about it in the news and being like, "Oh shit, man, that's like, obviously that's not good." How did seeing that, that happen, did having that occur change the way you employed fire support at all? Did it make you think differently about the effects of the rounds? And how did it affect your platoon? Because that's, let's be honest, that's not an easy thing to see or to have been even on the edge of being part of. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like that's tough for people. And rightfully so. And an investigation should have occurred and should have found out who was in the wrong because those civilians should have been killed. That's just how it is.
Yeah.
So how did you as a person that was there and that was involved in the situation, not necessarily, I'm not saying it's your fault or anything like that, but how did that affect you as a fighter, providing this fire support?
So it happened, 2 things happened. One, I was like, dang, man, that's terrible that it happened. And I wonder if it could have been prevented just within all of us with the breakdown of communication. So everything I did after that, I double and triple checked everything. If it was being passed to me and going up or vice versa, or if it's something I was going to do, I would be like, "Hey, how's this looking, Chief?" And then I myself was more cautious with it. But at the time you're young and you're fighting a war, and like we just, it was like months and months of fighting all day, every day. And I wasn't like it. But I see a lot of people that just kind of have the attitude like, "F them, whatever. I'm just here for us."
Yeah.
I've never taken that attitude. Still to this day, I'm not like, "Oh, screw all of them. They're all terrorists and they're terrible and this and that." It's like I said earlier, it's a people thing, and in people you have good, bad, and everything in between, right? So you have to think of it like that, or else it'll galvanize you against a whole class of people or something like that, and that's not what you want. While they're fighting, I feel like I was like, "Dang, man, collateral damage of war, because we're in war. Like, I need to stay focused and keep it, try to do what I can to keep everyone alive."
Yeah.
Then I come back from the deployment, and then I grow older and stuff like that, and then I think like, now it affects me more now. Where I'm like, dang, man, like so sad and unfortunate that those people were there. 2 sides are fighting, and they're caught in the crosshair of it, and not by any of their own, actions or anything like that. Wrong place at the wrong time, and just how tragic that is. And that's all you really can say to things like that.
Yeah, for sure, man. And this isn't a isolated incident, like civilian casualties happen, and it's, and you know what? Blue on blue happens. That just kind of shows you that it doesn't, even though we continue to improve our technology, our ability to target specific targets and stuff like that, at the end of the day, it's still war. Fog of war occurs, confusion occurs, weapons malfunction. It's just kind of one of those things. And I wanted to bring it up just because I think people need to realize that it's not like, people talk about civilian casualties almost. Some people talk about it almost as if it's like an intentional thing. Like, we just don't care. The warfighter doesn't even care. They're just slaying civilians. And there may be people out there like that, to be honest. I mean, that might be the case with the person. And if it is, they should be, prosecuted for that and stuff like that.
I feel like that's less so the case than than people just trying to do what they're told, protect those around them, and not hurt anyone and get out of there as well.
And it's just a super, super unfortunate incident that just kind of, it happens. And it's just, it's hard to say like it happens and kind of move on with it like it's nothing, because it's people, it's lives, it's stuff like you said, people that had nothing to do with it, that were just kind of trying to live their life and stuff like that. But anyway, I just wanted, like I said, I wanted to talk about that a little bit because it's a real world example of things that could happen as a fire support personnel, and it's something that happens in every war. And I honestly don't see it changing much at all, especially now that we're relying more on drone technology rather than someone that's eyes on the ground and can actually see what's occurring on the ground and stuff like that. Shifting a little bit, I want to say that I think you might be the first person I ever met that uploaded a video to YouTube. I think that was like back when YouTube was like kind of new and stuff. And I remember you coming back and showing us this video of a javelin that failed. So
still there.
Yeah.
Epic combat javelin fail.
I'm gonna pull that video, or you can send it to me, and I'm gonna post it up on Instagram when I'm talking about this podcast. But for those that haven't seen it yet, can you kind of explain what the actions of that day were, like what was going on for that day, and then what happened in that moment?
Yes, so it's funny because that's the video with my most views out of all my bands or anything else that I do. That's my most viewed video. And it's called Epic Combat Javelin Fail, if you want to find it. And what was happening, this is probably a week into us getting into Marjah. And I'm the farthest south element. And our command calls up and says, hey, we want you to do a combined assault on this area and then go and clear this big cluster of buildings. So we set up a couple sets of 240s to fire and suppress these enemy who were engaging us so they wouldn't move. We were going to do 2 javelin strikes. We had 81s and 60s constantly peppering it. And then I was going to bring in a Hellfire and strike it also. And while we're doing all of this, I'm videotaping my buddy, and he's recording, or he's firing this javelin. I'm recording it for him.
What were you recording it on?
It was an old Fujifilm digital camera that we bought off eBay. It was like $24 on eBay in 2009. I mean, it was like 1.4 megapixels. It's terrible. So I'm just like, hey, go ahead, dude. I'll record your first javelin shot, because he's fired in training, but never in real life. This would be his first real life javelin shot. And he was going to do, I forgot what there's high angle, and I think nominal. I forgot what there's high angles, and then nominal. And I think he was just going to do a nominal shot because he was trying to shoot it into a front door. So he gets all there and we're all ready. And they all fire in the hole, and he fires it. And the launch motor shoots correctly, but the flight motor doesn't engage. So it hits the ground right in front of us, flips over and lands in a ditch, and is aimed right at our wall. And I just yell, it hit the ground in front of us. And they're like, what? What'd you say? I'm like, it hit the ground right in front of us. And they all scream and run away from the wall. We all jump off the walls and all running and run back. And we're like, what's going on? Because it's got a 13-pound or something shape charge in there that would blast through the wall and kill anyone who's there. So we wait a while. It doesn't go off. We call EOD and say, like, hey, what's the likelihood the flight motor will kick in? They're like, oh, we don't think it will. It stayed there for days until they finally rolled in, whatever, on day 13. And then they set up a cordon and blew it in place. And then that was it for that. But it was just so funny to see, because you see videos like that, scrolling YouTube and stuff, that French guy fires a rocket, it falls out in front of him, and he runs away and stuff like that. But you never think it's actually going to happen to you, and then it happens, and we all just laughed about it. So it's super funny.
Was that the only kind of ordnance that you had an issue with, like a misfire or anything like that during the attack?
Yeah, I mean, we fired a ton of smalls, no problems. We fired a bunch of AT4s, no problems. Fired a LAW, no problem. Yeah, I mean, in the 155s fired fine. We didn't have any duds. And what we would do with the Excalibur. So you know how you had to put in the ballistic impact point, the BIP in for it? So because dudding was an issue, I just made the BIP the same as the target. So even if it failed to explode, it would still just smash and do a bunch of damage.
Yeah.
But we didn't have any fail. And the 60s and 81s were all fine. the marks were all fine. Yeah, I think that was it, really.
Huh? And you just happened to get it on video.
Yeah, and it was a couple of days into the initial invasion and all the fighting, when the fighting was at the highest peak.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. For those that don't know, the ballistic impact point, the way that works with the XCal round, because it's GPS guided, once the round is fired, then the GPS takes over and it kind of directs it, flies it to its target. Well, if you fire a round and the GPS doesn't kick in for some reason, it doesn't direct it. Well, what you have to do as in fire support planning is you have to determine the BIP, which means the ballistic impact point. Where is it going to land if it's just fired and it lands on its own without ever being directed by the GPS? So that's what he's talking about there, and it's something I think they still work on or still do. I haven't, obviously I'm out of the game for a couple of years now, but yeah, man. So what was, when you guys had been there, the entire time fighting through Marjah and doing this whole thing in Marjah and stuff like that, when it started to come to the end, when your relief started coming in and you guys are getting ready to come back home, how are you feeling about the whole deployment? Because I always like to ask guys this, like, you go into a war, you've never been in combat, you've never done anything like that, and you go into it with one mindset, and then you come out of it with a different one. A lot of people do, because you've seen things, the realities of it have kind of shaped your thinking and stuff. Did you experience that at all, or were you on the same kind of mindset as you had when you were going in?
Yeah, I mean, towards the end of it, a lot of the fighting ramped up because it was summer, it was warm out, it was like the end of July, beginning of August when we were leaving. So we would be doing the rip and be doing just as much fighting with them, as prior. But the mindset we all had was, we were told like 60% casualties and stuff like that. And we did take a lot of casualties, but not as much as we thought. So to us, we felt that we were fortunate that not as many people were hurt as what was initially told to us. A lot of the younger people, they're like, hey, I live in a country, a bunch of terrorists came and knocked down a bunch of buildings and killed a bunch of Americans. If I come over here and do this and stop them here, they can't make it to there. They felt good about that. And a lot of people, like I said earlier, shared mutual trauma, builds deep bonds. I got there and my goal was to try to protect every person I could that was in my squad and in the platoon and stuff like that. And the only casualty we had in our squad was one of the guys got shot through the arm at the beginning. It was the same time that my dagger was shot. Remember how my dagger got shot?
I don't remember that story. You can tell it.
Oh, okay. Anyway, I thought you knew about that. He got shot in the arm, and this is in February, flies away to a DFAC for a few months, heals up, and comes back and rejoins us in May and finishes the deployment. So to that, we all walked in together, we all walked out together. So for our squad specifically, that was a win to us. Yeah. Our morale was up, and we felt like, we heard about some of the stories about some of the stuff that some of these Taliban would do to some of the locals and to young girls and stuff like that. We didn't like that. We didn't like the way they treated the locals and things like that. Didn't like that. We thought we were making a difference and helping them out and letting them get back to normalcy. Building schools, building them wells, bringing cell phone towers and electricity and things like that to them. So leaving, we all were like, yeah, man, mission accomplished for us. That was the attitude we had.
No, that's cool though. I mean, that's how a lot of guys I think are. When I got back from my 13 deployment, which was the craziest deployment I had, was the scaredest I've been ever and stuff like that, but we all came back, and it was like, well, we went to Sangin and we didn't even get hit by an IED one time. I count that as a win, especially in an area like that. Speaking of IEDs, how was the IED threat in Marjah during the clear? Was there a threat or did it grow over time?
There was a huge suspected threat because there was a massive Russian minefield that was left, and just even all the people of Marjah were like, we don't go in this area. So when we got there and the support got in, we had the vehicle, what were the APOBs in the vehicles called?
I don't remember.
Mikliks.
Oh, yeah.
Mikliks. They would fire tons of Mikliks and clear all these minefields. And we, funny enough, a friend of mine just wrote me from Afghanistan that I haven't talked to in years, is writing me right now. I haven't talked to him in a long time.
That's awesome.
That's so funny. Based on the election, I don't know what's going on, but he said, "What's going on with your state?" Because I'm from Michigan. He's from Seattle, Washington.
That's funny. Tell him to check out the show. He'll enjoy the interview.
Yeah, I'll tell him about it. That's so funny.
When you got back, man, what's it for you? It's an interesting job that we had because we're attachments. right? So when the unit comes back, you were with 3-6. When 3-6 comes back, all those guys go back to their units. They stay, they stay with 3-6. They all live in the barracks together. They all kind of, they can all talk about the deployment and stuff like that. Whereas you're an attachment, so now you come back to 10th Marines. Did you feel like an alien coming back? Be like, none of these people understand what I just did kind of deal?
So I've always felt like 10th Marines, one, they're always like liaison. They're always like effing liaison. We're kind of separate from them anyway. They're like, you're here for us. Like that's always kind of the attitude that they've always had. And I felt very at home at 3-6. And even after the deployment, I didn't come back right away. We stayed there. I did a bunch of duty in the barracks afterwards and stuff like that, and did a lot of like the end of deployment cycling down things. And then at the very end of that, I was the only one out of all of us that was scheduled to deploy with them again. So I stayed on their docket.
Oh,
remember?
Really?
I came back to 10th Marines. You, Ori Howe, Mr. Xavier, and who else?
Shambo
got added to that, but I was still on it. Remember? So like I still split my time between like 3-6 and 10th Marines quite a bit during all of that, and prepared with them and talked to them and planned with them and doing all of that. And then I don't remember any of the names of any of the officers who were going to go.
But Scholl, Captain Scholl. All right, and that's the end of the podcast. That's where we got cut off. I'll get back with her and talk to him about getting a second interview in. We'll talk about the rest of his career and what he's up to nowadays, get caught up and stuff like that. Until then, make sure to check out his Instagram page. It's at North Tower Studio, at BDB Band, and at Official Amber Band. Make sure to check those out. Support the guy. He does good work out there doing that life metal that we discuss so much. And yeah, check out my Instagram at Former Action Guys, at J Kramer Graphics, and the website jkramergraphics.com. And have a good one.